President Donald Trump was inaugurated on Friday, January 20th, 2017, and on Monday, January 23rd, issued a memorandum ordering federal agencies to place a hiring freeze on all civilian positions throughout the executive branch. It forbade any vacant positions from being filled, blocked contracts that would circumvent the hiring freeze, and prevented any new positions from being created. And if the current political climate is any indication, history is about to repeat itself. So what even is a hiring freeze? How do they work? What effect does it have on federal agencies? And does it really result in increased efficiency for the taxpayer? My name is Michael Aguero, and I'm a GS-14 admin officer in the federal government. I've worked at 6 federal agencies and was the administrative specialist and administrative advisor to Undersecretary Bill Northey, who has unfortunately passed away. Which is a real shame because that dude knew more about farming than I will ever know about anything. Point being that I am not someone attempting to regurgitate a Wikipedia article to capitalize on the news. Admin officers are subject matter experts in hiring practices, federal budgets, and administrative policy. It is literally my job to understand this stuff and explain it to other people, and I'm paid very well for it. In today's video, we're going to break down hiring freezes, looking past headlines and political rhetoric to understand what's really going on. We'll look at what hiring freezes are, the intent behind them, and what actually goes on behind the walls of all those government agencies. Let's talk about hiring freezes. A hiring freeze is just that. It's a freeze on hiring, as you might have figured out from the name. They can be issued by the president or anyone deriving their hiring authority from the president for their respective agency. This is due to the separation of powers. Congress sets the cap on how big the government is allowed to be and how much it is allowed to spend, and then grants the president the authority to use those resources. The president can then decide how much or how little is used, so long as they stay within those caps. This means the president can implement a hiring freeze at any time for any reason. They can order it for a day, a year, or even their entire presidency. They can implement a hiring freeze on one group of agencies and not on others, or even specific types of positions, such as President Obama's freeze on SES positions in 2016. Jimmy Carter, who also just passed away, issued a hiring freeze that only permitted filling 1 out of every 2 positions. And Ronald Reagan issued a total hiring freeze on his very first day in office. Donald Trump's 2017 hiring freeze affected all civilian positions within the executive branch and was ordered to last until the Office of Management and Budget could submit a plan to reduce the size of the federal workforce through attrition. The Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is basically the CFO of the executive branch. They oversee spending. You may think it odd to address a hiring memo to a budget office. After all, OPM, who's the executive branch version of HR, only gets a passing mention. But it shows the administration's motive behind the hiring freeze. It's all about the budget. Hiring freezes are meant to save money in the short term and promote efficiency in the long term. The thinking is that by preventing all those positions from being filled, you save the money that would have gone to their salaries. As people leave through natural attrition to pursue other careers, start families, or retire, those left behind will have to figure out better ways of doing things, to do more with less. In many ways, that goes back to that separation of powers. Budget is and always will be Congress's responsibility. The country going into debt doesn't happen in the White House, it happens over on Capitol Hill. Congress decides how much money to spend and on what programs, but the president is the one who actually spends it. The president can thus influence the bottom line by simply refusing to spend the money. So while tanks might still get built and food assistance continues to go out, money can still be saved by not filling existing vacancies or creating new positions. The money originally allocated for the salary, benefits, and equipment cost of those positions simply rolls back into Treasury at the end of the year. While this short-term benefit is a drop in the bucket compared to the total federal budget, proponents of hiring freezes believe that efficiencies will be created due to manpower shortages. Redundant positions will be folded or eliminated. Bureaucratic machinery will be streamlined, ancient forms modernized, all in an effort to survive leaner times. In other words, a hiring freeze is intended to force a trimming of the fat and a tightening of the belt, to force the government to be a leaner, meaner workforce that can do more with less. But hiring freezes do a lot more than just restrict hiring and have far-reaching effects. For starters, anyone in the hiring pipeline gets flushed out unless they already have their entry on duty date, even if they've already gotten an offer. New positions, which may be needed to reorganize and streamline government efforts, can't be created, and good performers can't be promoted to reward them for good ideas. Let's look at a few examples and break down why that is. The hiring process of the federal government is long, arduous, and fundamentally broken, and has been for decades. The time to hire, from first interview all the way to starting at the office, typically takes 3 months and can easily take up to 6 or even longer if there's a delay in the background check. The fastest I've ever seen it go is 60 days. So at any given time, there are tens of thousands of people who are in the process of interviewing for positions, accepting offers, and getting background checks, excited to start their new life as a government employee and make things better for Uncle Sam. And a hiring freeze kills all of them. It slams the door right in their face and says, "Sorry, we're closed. Try again some other time." These are people who wanted to come work for the government, who jumped through a lot of hoops to get there and competed for their positions against hundreds of qualified applicants, and now they'll never work for us. All their good ideas, all their thoughts of modernization and fresh perspectives, gone at the stroke of a pen. And then there's the problem of attrition. Most government offices at any given time are under significant personnel shortages. This is due to a variety of factors, including budget cuts, the age demographic cliff we are rapidly headed towards and have no solution for, and the aforementioned busted hiring pipeline. A typical office has a vacancy rate of around 15% at any given time. You could tell how bad the problem is because of the staggering amount of positions that goes up on USA Jobs every week and the total reliance the federal government has on contract staff, which aren't affected, reduced, or consolidated by a hiring freeze, and who are more expensive than their government counterparts, but that's a digression we don't have time for. When the hiring freeze goes into effect, positions are already at a state of reduction, one that only gets worse over time. These are not offices that can necessarily cover down or figure out better ways to do things, because offices are often already at their limit. This environment doesn't boost productivity, it creates a tailspin. Any environment which continually squeezes its employees will only get so much blood from the stone. As pressure increases, people will quit, take more leave, or decide to retire. And sometimes people just straight up die. The surviving workers are then forced to keep up with more and more, further increasing the pressure and resulting with more departures, more attrition, more frustrated employees looking for greener pastures elsewhere. But it gets worse. The big boogeyman of the federal government is the lazy government employee. The slob who barely comes to work and only does maybe 10% of their job on any given day. And these people certainly do exist. They do so in every job. Hell, I've fired my fair share, including in the government. But the thing is, that termination process takes time. It has to in order to give the employee a fair chance, to avoid lawsuits, and to protect the government. But a hiring freeze stops all of that. It's not because of budgets or patriotism or productivity. It's about math. Because see if you can follow me on this, 10 is a bigger number than 0. Under a hiring freeze, I can't fire my lazy dirtbag of an employee because I know they can't be backfilled. The lazy employee may only do 10% of their job, but that's better than zero. Now, proponents of hiring freezes will say that person should be fired and the 10% should be redistributed to the existing employees. But those employees are already stressed, overworked, and thinking about leaving. That 10% might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So the lazy employee survives, coming into work and doing the bare minimum because the hiring freeze cut off the tap of replacements. It directly impacts the very problem it's trying to solve. And it's not the only way it has the opposite of its intended result. I want you to imagine an office with two employees who have a similar function. Their boss has just seen the news, heard of the hiring freeze, and is all pumped up to help drive this push for greater government efficiency. These two employees are both GS9s, which in the DC area at the time of this video make around $70,000 a year. Due to efficiencies in work processes, improvements in computer software, and a reduction in the need for their agency's programs, there really isn't enough work left over to justify two full-time positions. These two employees could be combined, making a more efficient position that saves the government money. But because of the hiring freeze, it can't happen. Let's talk about why. First, the remaining employee, the one that gets to keep their job and take on the added workload, has to be taken care of. If we simply dump a bunch more work on them without any additional compensation, they're going to file a complaint with the union, suffer a serious blow to their morale that might result in disruptions or mistakes, or outright quit, all of which would be bad. Now, a good manager would simply promote them because, again, math. A GS11 makes roughly $85,000 a year, and that's a lot cheaper than two GS9s, costing us a total of $140,000 a year. Under this scenario, basically everybody wins. One employee does let go, but gets transfer assistance to find another job within the federal government. One employee gets a much-needed promotion, and the office overall has greater efficiency at reduced cost. It's everything a hiring freeze is trying to accomplish, and yet a hiring freeze blocks literally all of it. The transfer assistance is dead in the water because no one is hiring. What's worse, that new efficient position, the one we're doing all of this to create, it can't exist either. Positions within the federal government have to be competed. This is a good thing. It guards against cronyism and discrimination, ensuring that the best possible applicant gets the job, and thus the taxpayer has the best possible person working for them. To let managers decide arbitrarily who gets a job would be unfair, resulting in complaints or lawsuits, and under federal guidelines would be illegal. So in order to make this new, more efficient position, two things have to happen. First, they have to actually make the new position description, new job announcement, and so forth, which, as you'll recall, the hiring freeze memo expressly forbids. Second, that position has to be competed, not just within the government between the two existing employees, but with the general public as well. Every citizen gets a fair shot at the position because, and I know this is hard, we're a democracy. That's how they work. Everyone deserves a chance. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, then what's the difference between competing for a promotion and a hiring action? Congratulations, you're smarter than every politician talking about this issue because they're the same thing. In the federal government, promotions are hiring actions. That's how they work. We want to make sure the taxpayer gets the best possible person in the job, and not just the person who's been there the longest or is sleeping with the boss. So positions, promotions, and everything else are competed, the best person getting the job. In our GS9 example, both existing employees deserve a fair chance for the promotion, as do members of the public who may have relevant skills from their education or time in the private sector. This is to ensure that of the three hypothetical applicants, the taxpayer gets the best person in the job. After all, we're the ones paying their salary. And for all of you in the comments, yes, I know about ladder promotions and direct hire actions. That would all be a red herring for this discussion. The more relevant point for this video is that hiring freezes directly block promotions. That may not seem like a big deal, but it has far-reaching consequences. And I should know because I lived it. My first federal government job was as a GS9 office manager at the Department of Justice. You can think of my career path as like a Pokemon evolution from office manager to admin officer and then chief admin officer. And I love that job. Best boss I ever had, working in an office that regularly racked up huge wins against giant corporations on behalf of the American public. They're called the Civil Fraud Section, and more people should know they exist. Seriously, look them up sometime. They're awesome. I was well respected in that position, as you can see from all the signatures on my DOJ seal, and I had a ton of responsibilities, including supervising 22 staff, managing a TS/SCI SCIF, and reviewing travel, all on a salary that was at the time like $54,000 a year. I consistently pulled the weight of several people and found more efficient ways to do things. According to the hiring freeze ideology, I was a model employee. But the issue wasn't with my job, it was with my apartment. Rent was going up by $100 every year, quickly pricing me out of it. So even though I liked my job, loved my boss, and believed in the mission of the office, I needed to make more money. Under the hiring freeze, I could not, because I was a GS9, and getting to GS11 required a promotion through a hiring action. And this is where we finally get to exemptions. The original memo states that the head of any executive department or agency may exempt positions they deem necessary. In theory, this acts as a safety net for all the examples we talked about today, ensuring that they can go through even under a hiring freeze. But that's not how things work in practice. Secretaries and agency directors are busy people and often delegate that responsibility one step down the ladder to a sub-cabinet level position, things like undersecretaries or assistant attorney generals. It has to remain this high up the chain of command to make sure managers aren't trying to circumvent the will of the president. DOJ's org chart looks something like this, with an attorney general at the cabinet level, the AAG at the sub-cab level, then a branch led by an SES, and finally the section led by another SES. And it's down here where I worked. My boss, a GS15 assistant director, took the exemption request to the section director, who was well familiar with the many projects I had worked on. The director then took it to the branch SES, who was also familiar with my work, and then she took it on up to the subcab, where it promptly died. I worked with my boss every day. The director got regular updates on my projects, and the branch SES knew me by reputation. But to the subcab, I was just a name on a piece of paper, one he had never met and knew nothing about. Even worse, he was a political appointee that had just failed to get confirmed by the Senate. He had way bigger things to worry about than the promotion of some GS9 buried down in the org chart. So I never got it. I held out for a few months, but ultimately economic pressures prevailed and I left the agency. I ended up going to Customs and Border because they were exempt from the hiring freeze on grounds of national security. All of this was in early 2018, by the way, almost a year after the hiring freeze was officially lifted because it persisted in many agencies due to the political climate of the time. A lot of people end up leaving government service altogether because of things like this. I could have just as easily gone to Amazon or Lockheed instead of another agency. And it's the good people who leave because they're the ones who can. Lazy employees aren't getting job offers with their 10% productivity, but I get my fair share and I take all my efficiencies and good ideals elsewhere because it's where I can be rewarded for my efforts. A hiring freeze will never solve the problems it aims to address because it doesn't understand the reality of the systems it seeks to improve. But the politicians pushing them don't care because hiring freezes aren't meant to solve a problem, they're meant to be a press release. Fixing the government is hard. Believe me, I've fought and lost enough battles in Uncle Sam's halls to carry the scars that prove it. But writing a press release is easy. And there's plenty of people driving down the freeway ready to thumb their noses at all those lazy bureaucrats in Washington. And I'll be the first to admit the government is loaded with inefficiency, but it has nothing to do with the amount of staff we have. It's in places like my current agency, which costs $2 billion a year, is redundant to half a dozen other agencies, has no mission or ability to go after that mission. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars we spend every year on consultancy trends, and in the billions we spend on profit-driven contract staff. A hiring freeze is never going to fix any of those problems, but it makes for a good headline, so we keep getting them. And it's easy to hate the people in Washington. Look, I get it, I hate plenty of them myself, but the federal government is in a lot more places than DC, where your friends and neighbors, the people at your local church, and at your kids' Little League game. And many of us are doing our best to make better uses of the tax dollars we're given, because we all pay taxes too. More importantly, we're the ones designing all those forms you have to fill out and all those regulations you have to follow. We're keeping the price of milk affordable through the Dairy Margin Coverage Program and going after Medicare fraud through the False Claims Act. We make sure benefits are easy to sign up for and that the checks go out on time. For better or worse, we impact every aspect of your daily life, which means you should want us doing the best quality work possible. How can we do that when we're subjected to pointless political stunts, be they hiring freezes or government shutdowns, when we're understaffed, overworked, and dealing with an entire generation of workers who refuse to modernize, learn how computers work, or solve literally any problem without having a half a dozen meetings about it first? And let us not forget, it has a huge impact on people's lives, altering the trajectory of their entire career. Blocking a promotion in the current economic climate can be the difference between buying a home or feeling financially secure enough to have children, to chase one's passions, or help others in need. It definitely altered mine. Had I gotten that promotion, I would likely still be at DOJ, still working in an office I felt was doing vital work on behalf of the taxpayer, instead of my current office, which is a train wreck of redundancy and inefficiency. I would probably not only be a happier person, I'd have done better work on behalf of the government and the taxpayers that these politicians claim they are trying to help. And that's the real lesson. Nearly all of these problems could have been fixed by simply having better employees. And you do that through rewarding good performers, attracting strong candidates through better hiring practices, and counseling or terminating the employees who refuse to meet acceptable standards. But that doesn't make for an exciting headline, and it certainly isn't easy. It would require holding employees throughout the federal government accountable, which would require members of the senior executive service to take their jobs and their responsibilities as leaders seriously. And the only ones who can hold them accountable are all the political appointees at the top of the ladder, who would have to be willing to learn their programs and the rules that govern them, to roll up their sleeves and dig in deep to solve these issues. And we all know that's never going to happen, because there's only one group in this country who can hold political appointees accountable, and that's us, the electorate. And personally, I don't see a future in which the electorate is going to hold those political appointees accountable, because it requires time and effort to learn how all these systems work. These days, we seem a lot more interested in throwing tantrums than solving problems, of celebrating headlines instead of asking questions. Because governing is hard and yelling is easy. Why fix what you can freeze? I'm Michael Aguero. Thanks for watching. If you want to know more about the inner workings of the federal government, I wrote a whole book about it called Rebuilding the Executive. It goes over the history, the structure, and all of the problems weighing down the executive branch. I wrote this thing in like 2019, and if I'm being honest, it's in need of a rewrite, maybe a second edition, but I don't trust the current political climate enough to do that. If you're curious, you can pick up a copy over on Amazon, both digitally and in print. If you're new to this channel, I've got videos on a host of other topics, including government stuff, office stuff, video games, writing, and just about everything else. Maybe check one of those out, or like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're not new to this channel, rest assured work on the next big video game retrospective is underway. I hope to have it out in, say, April. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.